What's going on, guys? Spencer Harris here from Fireside Nets, brought to you by Empire Sports Media. This is my first ever YouTube episode of Fireside Nets. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks to Empire Sports Media for putting me on the scene. And without further ado, let's get started. Today's topic is going to be role players that are essential to the Nets' success, both in the last 25 games and in the future. So I want to get started with a player that every single Nets fan is familiar with, has been familiar with for the past few years, and that's Joe Harris, a.k.a. Joey Buckets, a.k.a. Joey Headbands. Joe Harris is shooting the three-point ball at a ridiculous clip this year, 52% from the field and almost 50% from three-point land. He has scored over 20 points in 6 games this season. His season high was 30 points against the Wizards. Unfortunately, he made probably the biggest blunder of the year in that game by turning over that inbounds pass, and that eventually led to the Russell Westbrook 3 that won the game for the Wizards. But we're not going to talk about that right now. I want to talk about how at certain times this season, Joe Harris has looked like the second most dangerous scorer on this team. And that's saying a lot when your teammates are Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. He has been so special for this Nets team. If you see in the start of games, Steve Nash is always looking to get him involved early. So he'll usually hit a 3 in the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game, or he'll absolutely take one. But just sticking with that narrative of how special he is as a role player. He has made 3 or more three-pointers in 25 games this season. He's done it 13 times. That's a very, very, very impressive stat line right there. 13 times he's made 3 or more three-pointers in a basketball game out of 25 opportunities. Out of every single game this year, I think there's only been one game he didn't hit a three-pointer in. That was the game that ended his streak at 70-something games. I do not remember the number, but he starts for this team. He's come off the bench for this team. Whatever we ask him to do, hey, Joe, rebound the ball a little bit more. Play harder defense. Don't rely solely on that three-point shot. Let's get some 2-point, mid-range field goals going. He's been a lot better off the dribble this year. The one area of the game that is not his forte is playmaking, but he doesn't have to do that. Sometimes it seems he's turned a little bit too much of the basketball, and that'll lead to a turnover or two. But Joey Buckets, he's been, one of the most consistent and reliable guys on this Nets team. He is the first role player that I wanted to give credit to. Okay, the second guy we're going to talk about is a new Net as of this year, and his name is Bruce Brown. He came over from the Pistons with a reputation for being a great pesky defender, an energy guy. Did not see the court the first few games of this season. Took a little bit to get him into the rotation, but once he got into the rotation, he was here to stay. My first memory of Bruce Brown is in that Utah Jazz game. The Nets were coming off a few losses, a few inconsistent games. They started that game on an 18-2 run, I want to say. Kyrie was scoring at will, but Bruce Brown really brought it on the defensive side of the ball, and he ended up scoring a layup right away in those first few minutes. You can tell that when this guy is on the floor, his energy is contagious. They had a huge win a few weeks ago. I don't remember exactly who it was against, but his teammates called him a dog. They said that's what Bruce Brown does. We rely on him to make those effort plays on defense, to dive for the loose balls. And he hasn't been terrible on the offensive end either. He's got a very nifty floater that he's sort of perfected. That's his go-to shot. Right now, he's averaging 6.3 points per game and 4.3 rebounds per game in very limited action. But he's got up against some really good players. He played Jamal Murray in our win against Denver. He played him very tight. In that 125-123 win against Milwaukee, it was Bruce Brown who defended Chris Middleton on that last-second three-point heave, made it very uncomfortable for Middleton, and he ended up forcing a miss. So a lot of the credit goes to Bruce Brown on the defensive side of the ball for the majority of the season. He's been absolutely excellent. He's done everything that Nash has asked of him and more. A large conversation about Bruce Brown is, should he play down the stretch in games? Do you go with Joe Harris, who's a much more gifted offensive player, or do you go with Bruce Brown and rely on KD, Kyrie, and James to put the ball in the basket? If you're asking me, I'm probably going to lean towards Bruce Brown. I love Joe Harris. Joe Harris is my guy in quarters 1 to 3 and a little bit in quarter 4. But last 5 minutes of the game, if you're in a battle with the league's best, I'm going to rely on Bruce Brown's defense over Joe Harris's offense. It's just the way it is. Can Joe Harris hit a clutch 3? Absolutely. But do I trust Joe Harris to cover some of the guys that Bruce Brown has been able to disrupt? Probably not. So what Joe Harris gives to you on offense, Bruce Brown has done a great job on defense, really making life difficult for some of these wings and point guards in the NBA. All right, we move on to another role player. This is a guy that has been around the NBA. He's been on, I think, 10 different teams in his career. I'll double check that in a second, but that is Jeff Green. Uncle Jeff, as Nets fans have now given him a nickname, or that was his nickname. I don't know. I wasn't a huge Jeff Green watcher before he got to Brooklyn, but I'm definitely a fan now. And I'll tell you why. We've asked this guy to do everything, to play the 4, to play the 5, to come off the bench, to start for us. And he has done all that and more. He's averaging 9.2 points per game, shooting 51% from the field, 43% from three-point land. He is good for a few threes a game, a few slam dunks a game, but most importantly, he's a smart player. He's a stretch 4, stretch 5 to the max. He can play on the perimeter. He can post you up down low. He has a very underrated mid-range game. He can hit the one-step, fadeaway shot if he needs to. He's got a little bit of KD in his game, just in the sense that he's got such a nice touch, and he's 6'8", so he's able to get that shot really over anybody. The one area that Jeff Green struggles in is defending bigs. That is not his skill set. He is much more comfortable defending the stretch 4 on the perimeter than he is in the post. The lack of rebounds, he does not get a lot of boards. I think he's averaging 4 or 5 boards a game. And we're just going to double check. Yeah, Jeff Green's averaging 3.7 rebounds per game this year. His career average is 4.4 rebounds per game. You're not expecting, 10 rebounds from Jeff Green a game. That's just not his style. That's why you have guys like DeAndre Jordan. That's why you just brought in Noah Vonleh and Norvell Pell. They need to help with rebounding because that's something that this Brooklyn Nets team has struggled with. But sticking with Jeff Green, he's been phenomenal this year. I mean, he has posterized some people in the NBA. Some of his dunks have just been insane. The fact that he's as old as he is, he's played, how many seasons is Jeff? So Jeff Green is 34 years old, and he's still just friggin' rocking the rim when he goes up for a dunk. So kudos to him. Love the minutes he's given Brooklyn this year. A few other guys that are worth mentioning. The Nets traded for Landry Shamet to start the season in the offseason, and he has underperformed, to say the least. Not great numbers. He's only averaging 6.7 points per game. He's shooting 35% from the field and 32% from three-point land. This is a guy who's known in the league as a sharpshooter. He came from the Clippers. That was his skill. So the fact that you're not getting great percentages from him from three-point range, that's a little troubling. A little bit more recently, he's had some better games. He had 12 points against the Raptors on Friday, and then on Saturday, he came back with his best game of the season. He had 22 points in the blowout loss against the Sixers. But he's someone that if you do not trade him before the deadline, he is going to be a key part of this roster come April and May when you need a guy who can come in off the bench, hit shots. Outside of Joe Harris, I think he might be the most pure three-point shooter on this team. So he's got to get some more looks, but I am happy with what he's done lately. Right now, Landry Shamet is trending up, and that's good for Nets fans to see. And then finally, I don't even know how you can describe this guy, but we're going to try. I'm talking Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, TLC. For me, he is the most inconsistent player on this team. At times, he looks phenomenal. He can hit the open three on occasion. He can make a great defensive play. He can take it to the rack. He's great under the rim. He gets a little bit creative with his reverse layups, and I've liked what I've seen from him in regards to his creativity around the rim. That's all the good TLC stuff. Here comes the bad TLC stuff. He can look lost at times, both on offense and defense. He's averaging close to one turnover per game. It was 0.7 the last time I looked, which isn't great. When he is cold, he can't hit water if he fell out of a boat. There have been games where he'll start 1 of 7, 0 of 8, and that really hurts our offense because in those situations where Harden, Durant, Kyrie are all being double-teamed, triple-teamed, what have you, guys like TLC need to step up and hit that shot. And unfortunately, he's been very inconsistent when it comes to that. He's averaging 7.6 points per game, 39% from the field, 37% from three-point land. He's one of Nash's first guys off the bench. He started 5 or 6 games this year. Clearly, the Nets organization likes him enough to give him those minutes, and I think for the most part this year, he's played over guys like Landry Shamet and Bruce Brown, which is surprising. But, there are just times, and on defense too. I mean, he could be a great defender. There are a lot of times where he doesn't make the right play. He fouls a lot when it's not necessary. And those turnovers, man, I go back to the turnovers because I'm having these images in my head of TLC in a close game throwing the ball to the other team or not being on the same page with Kyrie, James, or Kevin. So those are the 5 role players that I think Nets fans should keep a close eye on as we, I guess, near that midway point in this. No, we're not even close. We're 25 games in. So this is, 25 out of, what are we playing, 80, 82 this year. We have about 15 games to go before we're at the halfway point, but those are some guys that I know Nets fans have been watching closely. If you're not as familiar with the team, take a look at those guys when they get in there. Just a few quick notes. DeAndre Jordan has been a lot more efficient and serviceable now that James Harden is a member of the Nets. It's been good to see Harden connect with Jordan on a lot of alley-oop plays. It seems like Harden always is able to make the right basketball play. And then also the Nets' recent acquisitions of Noah Vonleh and Norvel Pelle. We saw Pelle get a little bit of action against the Philadelphia 76ers on Saturday. Did not look great. 5 fouls, a few rebounds, a few block shots, and 2 points in limited action. Did not have any touch around the rim, which is troubling because that's literally the one thing you need if you're going to play the 5 on this team is touch around the rim. Noah Vonleh is active for the Pistons game tonight, so we'll see if he's able to provide some front court depth because that is something that the Nets have severely been lacking since they made the trade for James Harden and gave up Jared Allen. Is this team is very limited in the power forward and center position. As I talked about Jeff Green earlier, he's a 4, he can play the 5, but he's not someone who's going to bang with you down low. He's someone who's going to play on the perimeter. So outside of DeAndre Jordan, you just demoted Reggie Perry to the G League. You always have the ability to call him back up. He's another guy who's been a little bit inconsistent in his limited action with the Nets. Now you have Norvel Pelle, Noah Vonleh, and then hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we will get back Nick Claxton, who has been dealing with a shoulder and a knee injury. So that's your weekly Fireside Nets episode from me, Spen Harris, brought to you by Empire Sports Media. Hope you guys liked it. A lot more content to come.